So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Best Day Ever Media. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, joined by my co-host, Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Feeling extra super good today. It's a winter wonderland outside, and just finished up a nice workout.
Nice. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into today's stories, guys. FYI, we're going to be switching up or pivoting our format here on Best Day Ever. So starting tomorrow, we're going to start uploading 4 pre-shot news stories every single day, Monday through Thursday, and then going live at Friday, same time, so at noon Eastern Standard Time. Probably go live for about 2 hours, and Adam and I will riff on the stories of the week as well as hang out with you guys and, chat about random hobbies, things of interest, things that we didn't get to discuss in the pre-recorded shows. Essentially, the goal here is just to kind of mix up the format, see if we can grow a larger audience that way. I think long term, my hope and goal is to have us return to live shows, but we would just love to grow a larger audience, be able to engage with more people directly. So that's kind of the premise here for the show mix up. But anyways, appreciate you guys jumping in the chat throughout the last 31 episodes, and we're going to keep rolling here, but just in a slightly different format. But let's jump into the stories of the day. So first story here, a little news catch up on a few of them. This one from the Post-Millennial. Trudeau Liberals to facilitate suicide for mentally ill starting in March. The Government of Canada's website says that these or those whose only medical condition is a mental illness will be eligible for MAID starting May 2023. I just wanted to kind of highlight this because I know in the past we've talked about the MAID program previously. I definitely have my concerns in regards to the MAID program. And an expansion of who qualifies for it, again, I think is something that should be taken very seriously. So if you guys are interested on the Post-Millennial news article, which I've shared in the Telegram chat, you can find the highlights essentially of what all the different requirements are in regards to participating in the MAID program. But again, just kind of wanted to highlight that, put that on your radar. The next story that I wanted to quickly give you guys an update on, this one is... when I look at these numbers, it's hard for me to believe that Canada will be able to function. So debt charges ballooned to $53 billion. So the debt service ratio, this one's from Blacklock's reporter, the debt service ratio, that is public debt charges relative to tax revenues, reaches 14.3% in 2024. So essentially for every dollar that comes in through tax revenue to the Canadian government, 14 cents of that dollar is actually will actually just be going to pay debt servicing charges, interest, things of that nature. So obviously, if this was a business, this would not be a good sign for the business. And, the budget office wrote in a report, risk scenario analysis, public debt charges are $5.6 billion higher per year on average. So debt charges cost $20.4 billion last year. Cost this year will total $34.7 billion. So again, we're $14 billion more than last year alone. And by Department of Finance estimate, cost by 2024 will rise to $53.4 billion, more than the anticipated federal spending on children's benefit, $28.9 billion, or employment insurance for jobless of $26.6 billion. So again, while modern monetary theorists will tell you that this is no big deal, that the governments can essentially indefinitely spend dollars. When I look at it, if I try to interpret this the way I'd interpret a business, I'd find this very concerning, particularly because there's no clear there's no clear sign that we're going to turn around and start reducing the deficit. So presumably the deficit's only going to grow. There's the upside risk that we could still see interest rates continue to rise, which would put more pressure on this dollar amount, right? If we were to see the Bank of Canada raise interest rates further from where we currently are. This is all bad news, in my opinion, but want to highlight it because I don't think it's going to get the full coverage it deserves. Any thoughts on this, Adam?
Yeah, it's really interesting because that's actually a massive jump, right? To go from 20 to 34. And then if you're expecting that to essentially, you're basically going to double in the next, this year from last, and then basically triple. It's obviously a little bit less than that in both cases, but like those numbers are really bad. Like if you were looking at this and this was a patient, you'd be like, well, its condition is slipping, right? It's getting worse. It's certainly not improving its situation. So like, what do we have to do here? Like the antibiotics are not working. The virus is taking over if you were in a hospital and this was the case. So yeah, it's not good. And obviously 14% is a lot, actually, if that's just straight up going to debt servicing. And by the way, debt servicing also just like a portion of that's largely just going to be interest, right? So you're actually not really improving your position when you're servicing your debt. So yeah, I mean, that's scary.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. And at some point in time, our government's going to have to sort that shit out, in my opinion. Jumping over another story update here, this one from Canute.com. Ontario Premier Doug Ford urges masking, stop short of imposing mandate. So we have seen, and actually maybe I'll jump over to this one first, but we have seen the Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health come out already since I originally put together this story. And Kieran Moore is highly recommending that all Ontarians wear a mask indoors, including children 2 to 5 years old. I believe the question was even put forward to him essentially like, should my toddler be masking at home? And the answer was if they have the sniffles, yes, they should be masking at home as well, which is wild in and of itself, in my opinion. So just for anyone that hasn't been paying attention, we are going to be moving to mask mandates sooner than later, in my opinion. Right now, they're just this to me is like pre-programming, right? This is just framing it so that people start to accept that this is going to happen, and then a month or two we'll see the escalation here. A couple quick notes from this article. On Saturday, Hospital for Sick Children CEO Dr. Ronald Cohn said he would welcome universal masking. There's no question that would help, he said. Sick Kids Hospital will begin canceling non-urgent surgeries on Monday as it redeploys staff to deal with a flood of very sick children in the emergency department, the pediatric wards, and in intensive care. Now, one thing that just like a little anecdote that I noticed here was when I was scrolling through Twitter, one of the phrases that was trending was like, do not comply. And boy, is that just a quagmire of hot takes when you go into it. Primarily, it's people making fun of the do not comply people. And the number one thing I saw cited was, had you guys just complied in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess. And I don't even know where to begin to approach that because that's just so factually incorrect, right? Like with an endemic, that's never going to be the case. This is going to be around forever. And no matter how many leaky vaccines you take, no matter how many times you have masking mandates, it's still going to exist to some extent, right? If literally China, with a zero COVID policy and the most draconian measures we've ever seen, isn't capable of getting this, like, bringing this to heel, no one's going to be capable of it. And it's just wild, though. Like, I don't know, maybe these are Twitter bots, maybe these are nefarious actors on Twitter, but it is wild to see that.
Well, and yeah, when you say draconian measures, like what Matt's talking about, right, is welding people inside their house, like literally welding the escape doors shut so that they cannot leave the place that they're at, right? And like descending on the cities with like people in like hazmat suits, essentially spraying sanitizer and shit like that all over the streets and buildings. Like this is what was going on there. People are being like sheltered in place. Like if you're at work or at like a shopping center or at the grocery store and they just decide that like that's being shut down for quarantine, you're staying exactly where you are when that was decided. Right. So like that's the type of thing that they're doing. And all of that like has not helped them at all. Like you're seeing right now, we covered it last week where they shut down, I think it's Guangzhou or something like that, like basically all their manufacturing and industrial area. They just like locked it down the other day because they've got COVID again running rampant. And you're like, well, for all these measures, you literally have nothing to show for it. And this crazy circular argument with this logical fallacy of like, if you had just did it, we wouldn't be here. It's like, well, China forced it and it has no effect. So what are we talking about, man? Like, just show your work, and nobody can show the work on this. Like, I feel like this would be a D in math class in elementary school.
And just to clear things up, this video is live right now that we're shooting, Kohana. But we're going to be moving to pre-recorded for at least a couple weeks just to see how the algorithms treat that content in the hopes of being able to grow a larger audience. I see this from Chicken Little. I went to Walmart in Winnipeg. 3/4 of the people are wearing masks. That's actually shocking to me because when Adam and we actually went to Kenora, which technically isn't too far in the big scheme of things from Winnipeg. And I would say maybe 10% of people were wearing masks, and they were individuals that primarily looked at risk, right? So like older people, seniors. And that to me kind of passes, that seems reasonable, right? Like if you're in an at-risk group, you want to wear a mask, or even if you just like masks, you do you. But that's wild to hear that 75% of people were wearing masks in Winnipeg. Next update I wanted to share with you guys from BBC News. Kherson, beginning of the end of the war, Zelensky in liberated city. So we've been seeing, it looks like Ukraine is gaining ground in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The one thing that just stood out to me is the way this is framed, right? Like beginning of the end of the war. That's a pretty big and bold statement. I'd be surprised if this ends up being the beginning of the end of the war. Ukraine is moving forward and ready for peace, he told soldiers. So that's from Zelensky. At ceremony in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the annexation of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson was non-negotiable. Russia still occupies the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk, seized in 2014. So I don't know what's going on these days. I feel like it's very difficult to understand what's actually playing out here in Ukraine and Russia. But I guess the reason I brought this up was, one, it's been a little bit since the Ukraine update. And second, I want to call cap on this because I'd be shocked if we see this conflict de-escalate even in 2023. It would be shocking to me to actually, I would love it, but I just don't see it actually playing out that way.
Well, it's again, just for perspective, like we're talking in timeframes of weeks since the last like multiple billions of dollars has been sent there, right? So I would be very shocked if like we're sending billions of dollars that is intended for munitions and armory and things like that, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, this is basically the end of the war. Because even if that is the case, then it is kind of the end. And like, again, where's the accountability on this money? Where's it going? And like, who spent it? Why are these guns and shit showing up in other countries and being used by bad people already? You're like, I don't see a nice, clean, logical conclusion to this. And even if it does conclude, now they're going to be sitting on this mad stack of weapons and armor and all this stuff. And like, it's going to be interesting to watch this play out over the next 10 years is going to be the thing that I'm most like looking forward to seeing what these tertiary effects will be.
Yeah, and I think like the Canadian government announced another $500 million in military aid this weekend alone. So
great.
That drip feed keeps dripping. Jumping over our first WTF story of the day, this one from CBC News. Renter finds out guaranteed U-Haul reservation isn't guaranteed. Now, this story technically relates to a while ago because this happened to the guy on July 1st, but I just thought anyone that's ever dealt with U-Haul knows what a shitty experience it is dealing with U-Haul, where they're like, it's guaranteed, but your vehicle's not assigned. And you're like, well, what the hell does that mean, right? And so this individual was in Montreal, I think, moving to Toronto. And, the company acknowledges customers' 3-hour, 290-kilometer detour was unfortunate and extreme. It's so frustrating, honestly, dealing with U-Haul. And, he booked his truck 4 months and still got DK'd when he showed up to actually pick it up. And for any, I've had this happen to friends before. Like, they literally just pay you $50 as like, sorry, we fucked up. And
That's awesome. I've never seen that one before, actually.
yeah, so like if they don't have your shit when you show up, they'll refund your money and give you $50. But like
Oh my god.
you're like, but I've organized my entire life around getting this vehicle and service from you guys. It's just, uh, yeah, too much. But anyways,
But
just
that
want to
does
share
bring
that.
up, like, a broader question, though, about the franchise model itself, right? Like, if you actually truly want national coverage where you have, like, U-Haul at, like, every goddamn gas station up here in the north, and then, like, magically it's in every city, and basically what they're saying is, "We guarantee that the person who rented it before you said they'll be here," right? And, like, that's a that's a pretty hardcore model to try and, work with, but I'm not sure how you would properly police the, quality assurance on that, like how the hell do we make sure that the person renting it's actually going to show up?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave that discussion for U-Haul's business model for another day. Jumping over to the Globe and Mail, MPs prepare to spend 250 million on tunnels between parliamentary buildings. Um, I guess I thought this was worth discussing for a couple reasons. First of all, this isn't chump change, and this was just added on to the existing renovation that's going to cost $5 billion. So what's another $250 million on top of $5 billion? But when you read through it, some of the justifications they use, like the Freedom Convoy, and I'm just like, oh, so like this way, politicians will never have to accidentally bump into citizens. They can just stick to tunnels where they never have to interact with the unwashed plebs. Um, so the tunnels will be a late addition to a huge restoration project underway on Parliament Hill, including a $5 billion refurbishment of the neo-Gothic center block, Parliament's main building. And one thing I'll just say is like the moment you hear them say like neo-Gothic, you're like, oh, like this is trying to justify this unprecedented amount of spending, right? Like you wouldn't just be like, we're updating a building, it's going to cost $5 billion. You have to come in with like fancy terms to be like, well, the wood paneling alone cost $100 million for us to refurbish here. But anyways, $250 million for underground tunnels. Again, I would argue still that literally politicians never have to run into like citizen reporters or journalists or like, the rebel news. This way they can make sure that they only talk to the news reporters that are in the press gallery that are pre-approved by the government.
Well, the good news is too, this is nothing like the Yellowknife gold mine where the restoration ends up being, $4.38 billion later and 30 years. This is going to totally happen on time, on budget, on scope. There will be no changes. They totally vetted this project. And there's no chance that it's going to go from 250 million to, I don't know, 500 or maybe a billion. Who cares what by the time it's done? Plus, you'll get like a government change by the time this is done, and that'll set things back, and they'll have different plans. So, yeah, I mean, this is positioned perfectly for efficiency.
Obviously, call me old fashioned, but I feel like $250 million should be able to buy you a subway, not just a handful of pedestrian tunnels underground connecting
Yeah.
a handful of buildings over the course of just a few blocks. But what's fascinating to me is how quickly the news press is to just try and rationalize this from the government's perspective, right? We've got Ottawa's plans for a tunnel network come amid growing concerns about the security of MPs. In August, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland was subjected to a tirade of verbal abuse in Grand Prairie, Alberta, when she was approached at a city hall by a man who shouted or profanities. Sorry, I'm not sure why I'm struggling there. Profanities and called her a traitor. It's like, yeah, people probably should be able to call politicians mean names. I don't know if we need to spend $250 million just so that they never have to hear what we actually think of them. But anyways, wanted to highlight that because that also felt like a solid WTF story. And then last, I'm not sure if you saw this post going viral on Twitter last week, Adam, but I don't think we covered it. So I wanted to squeeze it in today. But Laurier student leads peaceful revolution against mask mandates. So the university has instituted mask mandates at their school. And so what he's been doing is just wearing masks and mask-like things in weird ways to try and call attention to it. So it appears that there are many classes where most students aren't following the mandate and the profs just don't care. But again, I love the fact, I think he's posting every single day. He goes to Laurier. And so today it was like, he's folded it just over like his mustache, essentially, like just over his upper lip rather than covering the nose and stuff. But yeah, thought that was humorous.
Yeah, our once powerful, once truly inspirational academic settings are definitely decaying. is all I've gathered from the last couple of years.
The weird thing is, though, like, if he then had a bodysuit here, this would actually just look like he was a COVID, like a branch COVIDian. But
Yeah.
all right, let's jump over to the first main story of the day I want to explore with you guys from the Globe and Mail. CMHC won't reveal where billions of dollars in rental construction loans are going. A few things to unpack here, but the rental construction financing initiative is one of Ottawa's major efforts to boost home construction. It was announced in 2016 with a $2.5 billion in funding, which has now grown to more than $25 billion. So literally over the course of 6 years, we've seen this expand by tenfold, making it the largest program in the government's national housing strategy, a bundle of different initiatives intended to improve access to affordable units. Now, remember that $2.5 billion amount for a second, because later on, when we get down further to a chart, I'm going to bring it up again. But efforts to learn more about the RCFI and its borrowers have yielded spotty results. Documents obtained through access to information requests tend to be heavily redacted. CMHC also declined to provide the Globe and Mail with a dollar sum of the values of projects that have received final approvals. And this is one of my biggest frustrations about everything related to government spending, is how often they don't believe we deserve the details. Like, why should you be able to spend billions of our dollars and not at least tell me who's getting it, where they're getting it, and what they're using it for, right? And like, why are these documents heavily redacted? Like, these aren't state security issue items, right? Like, you shouldn't be able to cite like parliamentary privilege or
Parliamentary
cabinet,
privilege.
yeah, or cabinet privilege. Like, this is literally just like you're throwing around billions of dollars, and we'd like to know. So but another 131 projects and 24,277 rental units were in undisclosed locations. The redacted group included $440 million loan for 855 units, which until recently was the largest RCFI project. So again, when we look at what's been disclosed, it's actually more than, I believe it's just under 75% hasn't been disclosed to us. And so again, remember, this started off as a $2.5 billion budget, grew to $25 billion, and now we literally have tens of billions of dollars unaccounted for, or at least publicly unaccounted for, right? Privately, maybe they know where it went, but we as tax-paying citizens aren't given the rights to understand that. It truly boggles my mind that first, we can see a program bloat that quickly over such a short period of time. And then secondly, they would dare to literally just not tell us any of the information around it, right? Again, they just constantly are announcing more and more funding around these things without details like provided to us. There's one project again that received $1.4 billion in loans for 3,000 units in Vancouver. And when you start looking at like how the dollar per unit here, you start to wonder, like, again, why are we approaching it in this manner, right? Like, this is very similar to trying to, reduce interest costs on student loans. It's not actually going to solve the issue that student loans are unaffordable. This program isn't actually going to solve the problem that rentals and houses are unaffordable in Canada, but it's a great way for individuals to siphon off some money for their own personal benefit. Any thoughts on the CMHC story here, Adam?
Yeah, it's just weird. Like, if you actually wanted to inspire trust in your citizens, and you want them to buy into your projects, and you want them to keep voting for you, and you want them to, generally speaking, like, be a champion for you, like, truth and transparency would be the only way to get there. And when you're telling me that, like, I don't deserve, with like, as a tax-paying citizen, I don't deserve to understand where you're spending the money, and to the degree of 75% of your massive budget, your absolutely colossal budget of spend, like, I start assuming that you're doing something untrustworthy. I start assuming that it's something nefarious. I start filling in the blanks with, well, what would I do if I was going to hide all this money? Like, what would incentivize me to do that? Well, probably things like insider trading and foul play and, money laundering and shit like that. Like, that's what comes to my mind. And like, it might literally be the opposite of that, but this is definitely not how you inspire trust in your people, right? This is not what a leader does. A leader tells people the mission. A leader shows the person why this actually is important to be spending on, and gives you an actual agenda. Like, hey, if we build these houses, we get all this residential inventory, then what that's actually going to do is help the average Canadian acquire housing ownership, right? Or help to house our immigrants that are coming in. And the reason why we need to do that is because they actually fill valuable places in the labor market that we have. And like, it's just, why would they not tell us what they're spending on and like who's getting the money? It's like the old adage is just follow the money. And like if you're hiding where the money trail goes, like instantly I'm like, I can't trust you, man. I'm sorry. Like, which brother, cousin, best friend, high school classmate did you give this money to? Right? Like, what developer, what builder, and what's your connection to them? Who are the stakeholders here? And I think like there should just be a threshold. Like, any government program that doesn't literally deal with just state, like national security or state security, if it crosses whatever that threshold is, like as soon as we say $1 billion, no, you need to give me goddamn receipts, or at least the categories of receipts. Like, who's receiving the money? Like, and when it's multiple billions, 25 billions, like, no, you definitely need to tell me where this is going at this point.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Jumping over to the second story of the day from Zero Hedge. Lack of humanity. France threatens Italy with consequences over stubborn refusal to accept migrants. So this is a story that's been going on for a while, right? There's a handful of countries in the European Union that disproportionately receive the bulk of like migrants and individuals fleeing, whether it's from like North Africa, the Middle East, or other parts of the world. And, Italy, and think of like a lot of the Eastern countries, right? So like whether it's like a Hungary, Austria, they're constantly being bombarded with a lot of these migrants first. And I found this particularly rich here, the way France is like essentially threatening Italy with consequences over it. Because when you look into the details, like this isn't a small sum of people, right? This one individual ship maybe is only 234 people, but like there's a much bigger picture here. So, in another article published on November 11th, while Italy has witnessed the landing of over 60,000 illegal immigrants over the course of the last 5 months, France has accepted the transfer from Italy of 38 asylum seekers during that period. So, essentially, like Italy is dealing with 60,000 people coming illegally into their country, and France is like, yeah, we'll take 38 of those off your hands. Uh, Not even 1%. I can understand why Italy just doesn't want to open up its borders completely to just anyone and everyone that decides that they're willing to, risk their lives and get on a boat. At the same time, I can understand that for a lot of these illegal immigrants, it's often framed to them that as long as they get there, then they're in, right? And they'll be taken care of. And so I understand why there's this desire that's similar to what we see playing out in the US in the southern borders, right? With a lot of migrants are coming often under like false information, sometimes misled by um uh or coyotes, right? Or what are they called? Like people that smuggle
Yeah,
ships.
those are called coyotes.
Yeah, and all that. And it's fascinating to watch this playing out in multiple first world countries because there is significant consequences, right? Like 60,000 people is a lot of people for Italy. And that's just over the course of 5 months, right? Over the course of a year, you're looking at 100,000 plus people potentially. That takes serious infrastructure if you're going to be able to just absorb that sort of population. Any thoughts here, Adam?
Yeah, and I'll go into a bit of an opinion piece here, but I've been to Italy several times, and I have noticed and full on experienced what lack of infrastructure they have for receiving this volume of immigrants. Because like if you go to the major cities in Italy, I'm talking Rome, I'm talking Milan, I'm talking Florence, I'm talking Pisa, you will see that they're actually like inundated with immigrants that don't have the opportunity to work, right? They don't have places to live. A lot of them are homeless. They're on the street. They set up like these very large and just sort of imposing like camps. And they sort of call them all gypsies there. They're not really gypsies as you might think. Anyways, they call them gypsies. But like these are just like immigrants that like probably fought tooth and nail to get on a boat, braved their life to get the hell out of where they were. But then when they land, like Italy just doesn't have the resources to deal with this type of problem. And it is rich for France to start saying this shit. Because if you're listening to this, like when we're done this stream, go and Google Paris violent crime immigrants, right? Like put those search terms into like a DuckDuckGo or something, and you'll start seeing that like France has a very, very, very big problem. So for them to be calling this a lack of humanity when Paris has literally been taken over by violent crime from various different sects of religion and immigration, like that's pretty funny. But we're also talking about a country that, like, right now they're limiting the amount of hydro you can use, right? They're limiting the amount of gas you can use. They're limiting the temperature that you can keep your personal private residence at, right? And this is coming firsthand. Like, my aunt lives there. My mom's sister lives in Livorno, and they are literally, from the government, mandated that they can't keep their house over, I think it was like 17 degrees or something. And if you go over that, you start facing fines, right? And this was because they're facing this massive energy crisis, largely due to the conflict in Ukraine. Um, and like, so to think that, like, they could just take on another 60,000 people, that they would have to find hydro, gas, food, shelter, employment, hopefully education, right? Because there's huge cultural gaps there too. These guys are floating over on a boat from Africa, right? That's where all these people, generally speaking, are coming from. That is a disaster, and there's no chance that they can deal with that. And my aunt actually works for the Italian Navy, and that's how, like, she has to interact with this quite a bit, right? Because they're kind of a port city, so these ships will land in their city, but it's a big Navy base as well. And they just literally don't have the resources to deal with it. They simply don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the logistics set up for it, and they don't have the resources. So I just, like, it's a huge problem, but I also don't think there's a great answer. Like, what do you do? Do you just turn them away and have them, like, starve or die in the ocean? Do you send them back to Africa, where they're, there's a reason they went on a boat with thousands of them? And this is actually a small boat, actually, if it's only had 200. Like, often they're floating over on, like, rafts and shit with thousands of them on a raft, and you're like, oh my god. If you've been in those oceans, that's no joke to be out in that open water. Like, there's a reason these guys are risking their life to get over to Europe. So I think this is one of those ones where, like, we're obviously not going to resolve it on this show, but there's deep and large problems here that are being unaddressed. And I think this is another thing that just kind of gets silenced or gets pushed off when we're like, yeah, it's a cool idea to go to war with Russia. You're like, no, it actually isn't. And if you're going to fuck over all of Europe for this, in terms of putting them in an energy crisis, like, there are secondary and tertiary effects to that. And these guys are all going to suffer for it, right? Including the citizens of Italy and France and Poland and Germany and everywhere else that's getting crushed by the energy crisis. Like, where else do these guys go?
Mm-hmm. And again, reminder, guys, links to this story as well as all the stories we're covering today are in the Telegram chat. Jumping over to the third story from Post Millennial, Pfizer and Moderna investigate links between COVID vaccine and myocarditis. A study in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology published Monday concluded men under 40 were more likely to get the disease, with symptoms appearing roughly 21 days after the second dose. A Kaiser Permanente study last month found similar results. And I think one of the reasons that this story is really worth highlighting is, obviously, had you talked about this on social media more than a month ago, it probably would have got you banned anywhere. Where now this is starting to be, more mainstream in regards to its coverage. Now, again, just because they're studying it doesn't mean that, that there's a hard, fast link here and that the vaccines are killing everyone or anything to that extent. But I think it is worth paying attention and understanding how the narrative evolves here around COVID, the vaccines, and just everything to do with the pandemic. So a few things I wanted to highlight for you guys. Because of this increased risk of heart inflammation, Scandinavian authorities suspended or discouraged young people from getting the Moderna shot in the fall of 2021. And the reason that's important to note is, here in Canada, it's still being actively pushed, right, on younger individuals as well as boosters. And I think the dichotomy of responses from various governments is very telling about priorities, incentives, and all that. For the FDA to fully approve the vaccine, they are requiring the companies to conduct the studies, some of which are planned to last 5 years. And so, a reminder again, it was through, like, emergencies authorization that essentially we saw in most jurisdictions and countries these vaccines be approved on an expedited schedule. The CDC has noted that the disease appears mostly in men ages 16 to 24, and that over 1,000 official cases have been reported as a side effect of the vaccine. So this is going to continue to evolve. I'm sure we'll continue to see updated information around it. I do hope in Canada we see more nuanced discussion come out around the vaccine rather than the very political partisan-oriented rhetoric that we've seen coming primarily from Justin Trudeau and his Liberal cabinet. Adam, anything on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big fucking issue with what you just said as well, and that's the companies themselves are going to run these studies, right? That's what the biggest critics of Pfizer and Moderna and any of their previous negligence or wrongdoings when it comes to when they've been sued or when they've lost cases for like criminal negligence. It typically is the case that they run their own study, they push out the results that they want to see, and then later, years later, there's these large lawsuits because people dispute that information because it's just like, people actually get injuries from certain medications or vaccines or whatever. So like, again, like I really don't really understand how the company gets to run its own trial on the shit that they profit off of, because like that to me just seems like a massive conflict of interest. And it's played out several times before. Like, how is this not a completely independent double-blind thing that's run with no connections, like no people on the board that have stakeholders or connections to Pfizer and Moderna? Like, I really don't understand how an impartial third-party company can't be leveraged here. Because like, what? Like, it's like asking the criminal to be the prosecutor. Like, I don't get it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the defendant to be the prosecutor. Like, it's just like, it's so stupid.
Yep, not going to disagree on that one. Jumping over to the Mises Institute for the fourth story of the day, the rise and fall of Trussonomics. So this is obviously in reference to the former UK Prime Minister who had one of the shortest stints as Prime Minister in quite a while, Liz Truss. There's a lot to unpack here, but just wanted to highlight a few key points because when this originally broke, I found it very troubling, and it seemed like it got mainstream coverage, but not for the right reasons, in my opinion. So, what followed can best be described as a case study in how not to promote a free market agenda, and it deserves close study lest policymakers elsewhere repeat the mistakes that Truss and Kwarting made, which ultimately brought them both down. Their fundamental failure was a simple one. Yes, tax cuts were reasonable, but those needed to be more than matched by large cuts in government spending to reduce the fiscal deficit and establish that the new government would be fiscally responsible. And again, great analysis here. We obviously can't read the entire article to you guys, but the reaction to the mini budget from the commentariat and many politicians was, with exceptions, hostile and so ill-informed that I wonder whether the UK has become an idiocracy. There were the predictable leftist howls that the tax cuts only benefited the rich, but the most bizarre criticism came from the former Goldman Sachs investment banker and Davos acolyte, Rishi Sunak, a former conservative chancellor and the runner-up to Truss in the leadership race. He maintained throughout his leadership campaign that the tax cuts Truss was proposing were bad because they were not funded. So I guess a few things there that it's rare that we actually see that mattering to the general market. And I think in this case, that's not actually what caused the downfall of Truss. It also became clear that if nothing was done, most UK pension plans would default on their LDI swap positions by the end of the day, the consequences of which would be catastrophic. The bank responded by temporarily suspending quantitative tightening and announced a $65 billion quantitative easing package to buy long-dated gilts and bring their rates down. The gilts market recovered sharply after the announcement, and by the end of the day, the pound had risen to 1.088 against the dollar. The events of September 28th had exposed a hitherto unappreciated risk exposure in the UK pension system, itself the result of a string of earlier regulatory failures. So, again, just a quick synopsis here for anyone that forgets. We literally had a prime minister coming out, a newly appointed prime minister come out, and within, I think it was 6 or 8 weeks, be pushed out of office because of her mini budget, which essentially was putting in some austerity, but the austerity she was recommending wasn't necessarily like purely shown that these tax cuts and were tied directly to reductions in spending. And so we saw the bond markets essentially freak out, right? The equity paper markets, and force a standing prime minister of Britain essentially out of power. And I think that that's a precedent that shouldn't be easily overlooked. And then again, essentially the bond markets essentially setting terms when it comes to how the federal bank in England dealt with things and being forced to do the $65 billion in quantitative easing. So again, to me, this is just a fascinating situation in its totality. The defenestration of Truss and installation of Sunak. And again, he was the primary critic of it, right? So the primary critic then went on to become the new prime minister. He's deeply in the World Economic Forum circle. Sunak, as the new PM, amount to nothing less than a Remainer coup, has taken control of UK economic policy. Observed by my friend and co-author David Blake, and I agree. The real risks of the economy now come from the Remainer elite, both at home and abroad. The radicals had been beaten by the elite, and yet it is radical reform that the UK economy desperately needs now, more than ever. Instead, Sunak supporters are now calling for right-wingers to be purged, i.e. advocates of low taxes and small government are no longer welcome in the Conservative Party. And again, I think that's important because we're about to see UK politics kind of thrown on its head or turned upside down in regards to how like how these parties and policies are even in alignment with one another. Any thoughts on this Mises article there, Adam?
Um, no, like one of the things that I actually just don't even really understand what a liability driven investment is. So when they're talking about LDI swaps, I got a little lost there, but yeah, I mean, it is too bad though to see a candidate that was advocating for kind of less government, less taxes, that type of thing, just get thrown out in literally the fastest uh, fashion that they've seen in a long time. And yeah, I that type of thing like makes me feel a little bit hopeless when it comes to the World Economic Forum. Like I don't really understand their agenda, but it feels very bad to me, and it seems like they are able to exert power often.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And so that's it for today's the last 24 news stories. Again, reminder, as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be mixing up our format at least for the next couple coming weeks. We're going to be putting out pre-recorded, snappy videos, 4 news stories a day, so you guys will still find them here, whether you're watching us on Rumble or watching us on YouTube, or if you happen to be listening to us on uh, uh, Spotify. We use Anchor, so I was thinking Anchor there, but on Spotify, we'll still be there, guys, and we still look forward to your support. Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. There's also still the Telegram chat where you can have two-way conversations with us, and we'll still be publishing our notes to the Substack articles as well there. So again, looking forward to just kind of mixing things up, seeing if we can garner some more attention from the algorithms through a slightly different format. And we'll still be going live every single Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Anything else we should mention here, Adam?
Yeah, I just hope you guys use this opportunity to get a little bit more engaged with the Telegram chat, because I know, you know, you guys love commenting here on the live videos, and we really appreciate that. And the Telegram chat will still be available. If you guys have stories that you would love us to cover, throw them in the Telegram chat and we can include that in our research. We're typically going to be working on like a 24-hour cycle. So if you guys see a story, you really love it, you want to hear us cover it, drop it in the Telegram. We'll cover that story for you. And then do leave us comments on the YouTube channel. We're on Rumble. We would greatly appreciate that as well. And we'll try and get back to all of your comments. And yeah, nothing's changing. We just we respect the algorithm, and we know that we've got great content, and that's why you guys have stuck around, and we appreciate that. But it'd be great if we could grow our audience. It'd be great if we could tell more people our message, right, and spread to more Canadians, more people around the world that, like, hey, this is some of the news that you're probably not hearing, and get our perspectives on it. So appreciate all of you guys, and we will well, we'll see you tomorrow, but we'll be recorded. And then come in on Friday. Come over Friday if you guys want to as well. Jump in the Telegram and suggest, what should we be talking about on Friday when we actually do get to hang out with you guys live? What would you like to hear? Chicken Little is advocating already for COP27. So Matt will have to rock, paper, scissors for that one. And we can give that some coverage. So yeah, that's about it, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to